Yeah, so that's recording. So thank you for accepting the the invitation to talk to me. I was very following our debate yesterday. I think in the debate we talked everyone has a few minutes, and so it's great to have an opportunity to dig a bit further in some of the things you said. So if you could start like by introducing yourself and the organization you work at and your role there, and that would be
Yeah,
great.
sure. Yeah, and thanks for invitation as well. So, my name is Nikita Nichev. I work at Garage Museum of Contemporary Art in Moscow, and that is like one of the most prominent contemporary art institutions in Moscow and in Russia. I do like several things there, and they're quite different. Like one of those is managing the web developments for the museum. That means creating websites and different web-oriented projects and products. And the other thing I do is I work as a research curator for Garage Digital, which is a special program of the museum which is dedicated to fostering researchers and artists that work directly or indirectly with emerging technology and newest media. And well, yeah, we have kind of um, um, different kinds of possibilities for them to realize their projects and to ponder upon what they're doing. Um, so yeah, uh, I wonder where should we start? And I could just show you, for instance, the online platform which this program is centered around, and probably just run through it and talk about some things there. Is it okay?
Yeah. I guess the web
Uh,
platform is a big part of what you do if you're digital, isn't it?
well, yeah. Oh, if you could enable the screen sharing for me, I could share my screen and kind of show it. So yeah, this platform was actually conceived as something that was in between two departments of the museum. So I was initially working in basically like web department, which is a part of marketing of the museum, and at some point, together with our curator, senior curator Katina Zemtseva, we did a project that I'll probably just try to show it.
Nikita, when
Um,
did Garage decided to have a digital like arm? Is it long time ago?
uh, so I think it was like, yeah, this first project we did, which was an exhibition, it was 2018. Um, and it was like a kind of an experimental project for the museum, which had some physical place to um, a physical place, and also kind of a digital program as well. And it was centered around like digital arts and the ways the museum has to adapt to the new or not that new realities of ways of artistic production and ways of communicating with the audience via different kinds of newest mediums.
Right.
And for instance, it had like an ongoing laboratory for, um, creating and um, projecting 3D pieces and kind of producing them right in the exhibition space that was open, and I think the audience could also take part in that. Um, it also had like several parts in it, and so the first one was indeed this laboratory where this like physical 3D modeling and 3D printing stuff happened. Um, Another one was like a special project with the Russian artist Helena Nikinola, who is pretty prominent in working with different kinds of technologies. She did like projects with artificial intelligence, blockchain, and whatsoever. And what she did, she had kind of her um, studio, which was open right in the exhibition space, and she um, did a research of how artificial intelligence could work on the sounds, and particularly the sounds of the birds. Um,
So how
no,
interesting. So what?
yeah.
She
So
was like recording the sounds of birds and analyzing it with artificial intelligence. How did that work?
well, yeah, that's what she was doing, and she was doing it like in real time. She was present at the museum, and it was cool that the audience or anyone could come up and check out how that works. And she did it together with different researchers, like people from who deal with machine intelligence, and people who are really into birds and birds' languages and whatever. And she tried to model and reproduce the birds' languages, trying to find out the patterns there. And I think she proceeded with that project, and she had it at Ars Electronica last year, as far as I remember.
Right.
So yeah, that was a pretty kind of inclusive and pretty hands-on, and it was really cool to to see that work and to kind of have an opportunity to check out this production process, which is quite different from what we think if we just think of an artist studio and the way it looks.
What are the my lamp just fall out here? What are the possibilities there? Is it like to understand how to communicate with birds or to replace birds, or what is she trying to,
Well,
to show?
well, I think it's a kind of a speculative project that kind of shows this ambiguities between our possibilities to analyze the language systems and just the presence of our language system and our idea of this, structuralist view of the world where, well, any language system has to have it. And I think she was kind of researching how can we probably get rid of it, or maybe indeed find it. And I'm pretty sure it's not that scientifically applicable, of course, but it is interesting to kind of have this view on the intersection of science and artistic research, where you have kind of a possibility to imagine something inhuman generating um, another language structure that has its own logic and that can be researched once again and tried to be understood.
Yeah, yeah. Let me ask you this on this point.
Yeah.
Ask you this question as like a few people that come to me. They, as I said, like they are not from the arts, but they think that if you look at historically, we see quite often that the artists show first a new kind of a new use of technology, a new behavior, a new type of perception, a new use of image that later get adopted by like the majority of people. And so we're in this transition with this pandemic. So what would you say art can show us about this new normal, and some just like some speculation?
Yeah, well, I think of it as indeed kind of a possibility to construct new futures and construct new worlds, and uh, try to not have any limitations or not have any particular programs in that. So in this particular project, for instance, it's pretty obvious that like it's not something that imposes a kind of set hierarchical structure or a set viewpoint or a kind of hard prognosis on what are we going to do. I mean, it's very imaginative, and it's in this way very it can move in very different directions. And so, yeah, for me, it is first of all this kind of idea of liberating our imagination from some set points of you know, like um, some points following one another, like some timeline that has to be progressive and has to like embody some kind of ideas.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Interesting. Should we go? Should we carry on? Is there like other projects that you can?
Yeah, sure. Actually, during this project, we also had like a rather large, um, video program. We showed like Dream Journal by John Ruffman, which was one of its instances back then in uh, 2018. Um, we showed uh, a really great film by Zach Blass, Jubilee 2033. So those and like uh, other different um, video works that had this distinct new direction of production. For instance, I know, yeah, for instance, James Bridle's video Great Antecedent, where he kind of researches the ways artificial intelligence can be tricked into perceiving the world not quite as it is, and how we cannot actually rely on that. And together with that, he parallels it with Greek mythology. Well, anyways, yeah, the idea was that to kind of showcase this new visual language, which corresponds with some very real infrastructures and very real modes of production that are sometimes still kind of overlooked. Another, I guess, interesting thing that we proceeded with later was a program of Let's Plays. So we did like several events of quite different formats, but they were in some kind connected with the medium of Let's Play. You know, this very popular format of just playing a video game and commenting it, and having like a great amounts of audiences looking at it. And that's just a pretty weird way of spending your time.
Sure.
Uh,
Can you show
like
us this post-escapism video games? And I think it's fascinating. Is there any like an example or anything you could show us?
Yeah, I think so. Let me see what I. Yeah, this one is my favorite actually. Just a sec.
This is fascinating. A video game that can develop consciousness and connectedness instead of alienating.
Right. Yeah. As for that, it was a lecture by a philosopher, by a Russian philosopher who deals a lot with video gaming, and well, he did a kind of so he showed like several video games that have some political viewpoints on the world, and that through their mechanics kind of enable us to relieve other experiences that are not usually possible, or to those that we can't relate to directly. And yeah, there is that idea that a video game is escapist as soon as it is a kind of a simulation and a world in itself kind of separate. But yeah, what he was talking about was um, the games that do something else. I mean, there are like studios like Mole Industry and Ananthropy and Nicky Case. There are a lot of people who do that. As for some other things that we did, well, this is like really the my favorite from that year and from that program. It was a Russian philosopher and art critic Boris Klushnikov, who was playing with art critic Lena Kolbukova. They were playing Dark Souls Remastered. They were like literally playing Dark Souls, but what were they talking about? They were talking about trauma, about the ways we can relieve trauma, and the ways how that mechanics, you know, it's a very a hard game to play. I mean, you always die and you kind of accept these moments of death each time. It's like very it has this like dark tones in it, but through it you can liberate from different traumas you might have. And at some point they were talking about, you know, like the Marxist views on how you can develop and overgo the historical trauma, etc.
Oh,
So yeah, that was really cool.
is this accessible? Like, if I want to play it, is how is it? Or do we need to buy the artwork to be a gamer, or how does it work?
That is just regular game. I mean, Dark Souls. It's just a game you buy at Steam, I guess.
Right.
But yeah, the format was such that the discussion was kind of structured around this process of playing. So yeah, for us it was very interesting to try and yeah, we actually streamed it on Twitch, I think. Like
Right.
had this talk indeed as a let's play, and it was interesting to research how this mediated presence and this like um, presence in the space of the museum, because that was in the lectorium of the museum, kind of recharge the possibilities of this pretty sad medium, like this way of looking at the game while somebody else plays it. So
Any other,
yeah.
like, any other example
Hmm?
of these video games? And
Yeah, I guess we can try and remember them. So yeah, there were like a Russian collective of Iberg. They do like art games. There is a great Russian artist, Mikhail Maximov. Um, he's like really cool and really prominent. He creates really weird video games, and I think for this Venice Biennial he did like a
wow,
special video game for the Russian Pavilion. I think it's going to be accessible at some point. But yeah, it, for instance, it depicts like the art world, and like I don't know if you see that on this preview. So it's like a curator who follows you, and you have to kind of not make him reach you. You can only go backwards, and it is all set in one of the museums in Moscow. Like it is reproduced in the game. I mean, yeah, it's really good.
how is the display of this? Is like an exhibition with a big screen and people are playing? How is the, because it's so
Uh,
new, so different from what we're used to. So how do you show it
yeah.
in Garage?
Oh, I would love to show it. I'm wonder where do we have like this. So we had like this kind of gaming room. It was in the exhibition space, and people would come. It was pretty free. And yeah, it actually reproduced this idea of let's play. So somebody would just start playing a game. You could choose one from the ones that we've shown, and it's a really great experience for people also just coming up and looking at that and having a chat like random strangers, and both like elderly people and children and
Mhm.
whatever. So that is like some very good dynamics.
And the
Uh,
games, do they have the usual like winning and losing mentality, and or do they have like a different?
no, surely not. Yeah, I think it was mostly about the games that kind of worked with the medium of the game and tried to subvert it in very different senses.
Yeah,
Uh, so yeah, it is about trying to play with the game and not play the game.
right, right.
Um, yeah, actually, I think that like there was a lot of stuff shown there.
Mm,
It would be cool just to check out
sure.
some of the topics I mean online. Uh, yeah, so that was the first project that we did, and there were some other parts to that, and I think we could talk about it a lot, but probably should move on. And after that, after this experiment, we thought that it would be cool to kind of proceed with um, thinking about how a museum can work with all these kinds of new mediums, all these kinds of new ways of production, and we decided it to be an online platform um, that would actually kind of um, have this digital space as indeed a space of the museum as well. So we're of course not trying to go like medium specific, and it's not about artworks that are shown online exclusively, but it does have this probably the form of dissemination of the works that is crucial for it. Um, so yeah, some of the projects that we have for now and that we're planning, I could talk about those.
Yes, yes.
Um, okay, so actually, yeah, we can see that
Should we go into
there's.
these? I don't know, whatever you're excited, but I'm excited about this post-human study labs. And
Oh yeah, yeah, it's quite an interesting project indeed. So it's a collective of Russian artists and researchers. There are like three people there. All of them, I think, have a PhD in something. They um, are researchers and scientists.
yeah.
And what they do is they create a collective that researches what they call like Russian federations, and that's a neologism, I guess, that refers to particular post-Soviet spaces that are kind of abandoned, that are that might be human exclusion zones, and that have really weird new ecosystems formed around this post-human presence. Um, and well, they have it in this kind of mapped style. This map has different layers. So what we're looking, for instance, right now at is a layer of petroleum. It's like a real map of how petroleum goes um, through Russia, through different um, places where it gets dissolved, and they're talking about the different strategies and different possibilities of the futures and how they would be reassembled with or without human, actually. Um, and
Nikita,
yeah,
how does this? Sorry, I'm curious. I
sure.
stop you to ask a few questions.
Yeah, that's cool.
How does this relate to other fields of knowledge? Because obviously there's political knowledge, there is technical, like petroleum knowledge, and so when the artist is putting this together, like, is there a interdisciplinary collaboration, or the artist researches it alone? Is there like a barrier? No, you can't go beyond here because it's, I don't know, military information or political information. How does it work?
Well, yeah, I think that that's the most interesting in this project, is that it's quite interdisciplinary. So what they do is they have a collective of artists, scientists, researchers, very different kinds of people. They also do it as a field research. So they go for trips to certain places, and what is like the output of that are quite different works of quite different people. So some of them are more or less scientific. That is like an alternative map of Russia that um, can be formed of the forestation of Russia that could be formed um, after the petroleum runs out, and that would be like a very drastic change just because of very different agents, uh, like human and inhuman agents that reform this whole map. And some of those are quite speculative. Like, for instance, here the artist researches a virtual world in Minecraft that and he kind of tries to find resources and find petroleums in uh, in this uh, in this virtual environment. So they kind
Wow.
of yeah. Uh, and they pose a question of like if we're trying to find resources in a seemingly unlimited virtual world, well, is that really that unlimited, and how much time and how much resources it actually takes to even find resources in the virtual world.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And who sponsors these research? Is it Garage sponsors? How is this made possible?
Yeah, it is sponsored through kind of grants. These particular guys were working on their project together with an exhibition that was on at that time, and they had like special workshops, I think, uh, that were parts of the exhibition actually. So yeah, they were doing like all kinds of experiments with all kinds of different biologists and chemists and whatever. And that was, I think, sponsored through our exhibition department, and we were helping with setting up this online resource where they create their maps and where they create their um, so that's like a map of Jerusalem in Russia, for instance, that is upcoming. So we're mostly working on web platform that they do.
Wow.
And so that's pretty much extensive, and I really love where they're going, and I think they having some of their research planned like for this and the next year as well.
Is there collaborations with groups of entrepreneurs and people talking with working with like startups and innovation technology, and because there is an overlap there, isn't it?
Well, yeah, uh, yeah. For instance, Hippolyte Markelov is like a what he calls himself a bio artist, and he has his studio in Skolkovo, which is like a hub for startups in Moscow.
Right.
And yeah, he's extensively collaborating with all different kinds of, like say, scientific research-based startups. Together with that, they are kind of researching um, the post-Soviet ruins almost of very different industries, and yeah, that is a pretty interesting overlap and a pretty interesting language that is produced through that.
Should we see something in the bioengineering and this mix between science fiction and bioengineering, or this
Well, by the
creativity?
way, yeah, we can probably think of Sasha Pavlov's work, and I really love it, and I really love the story behind it, and it's also pretty sad. Well, I don't know if you know him, but well,
No.
he was a quite a prominent artist working with news media, and yeah, really loved what he do all of the time, and so we had the exhibition which was called The Common World. It was an exhibition about centered around the problems of ecology in very broad sense, because it's obviously a great topic now still, and he was commissioned to do an artwork there for that exhibition, and he was doing it in collaboration with a couple of data scientists. And what he did a field research in Moscow in the Museum of Darwin, which is a museum for like natural sciences and like all the biological history. And he was researching the ways um, how the organisms evolve in different um, in different ecosystems. He kind of sampled some of the very early life that was present at that museum in Moscow, and what they were doing with the data scientists. They did a kind of simulation which worked with artificial intelligence as well, and that was trying to kind of simulate the processes of ecosystems in this kind of very speculative but still pretty hands-on way. And it was pretty awful that he died just mm, I don't know, like a week before the exhibition opened. So the work was almost done, and it was shown at the exhibition, and that was the last work of the artist. And his colleagues, Alessia Negrete and Matthew Lutz, were working on kind of um, making it to its final stage, just as close as they could with his vision. And so before that, we decided with him that we would also make this work available online. There's probably going to be a lot of sound here. Or is there not? Okay. So the idea of it is that you can plunge into this kind of speculative ecosystem, and you find different agents that consume resources and that create their forms in a way and that kind of reproduces the real structures of the evolutions, and it is pretty cool to kind of see how they change their forms and how they communicate, and kind of find their most fit forms to live and reproduce in this kind of an environment. And yeah, if you're playing it like online, it has like a very plunging sound, and it's really cool just to kind of look at how this goes, and also follow this numbers of agents and their fitness, and how they kind of indeed reproduce in the real time. And I think it's also important that what the guys Alish and Matthew did, they had a pretty extensive text which is also available here, which describes the flow of the project and how they had all the ideas and how they were realized technically as well, and what were the algorithms behind that. I think it's important to kind of try to have a bridge between the languages that are used in technologies and that are used in these mediums, and the language of art, because they are quite different and they have like very different structures. So what we're trying to do is to kind of make both these languages talk to each other and make them all accessible, because that is like what is, I think, one of the missions of the program.
Yeah, we talked briefly yesterday about this complexity theory, which in my understanding is this kind of relation between the sort of a network system with like a feedback loop that's and how these kind of different items kind of change and relate to each other, and which creates like a very unpredictable outcome. And so it's how do you, I mean, how do you, it's I've seen a couple of talks about it, but my knowledge about this stops there. And
yeah, well, I think that that is one of the yeah, of the major topics that we are thinking about right now in the program. Um, and well, this well, there are different kinds of things we can think about, and different ways of thinking of it. So we can surely say that this is a trend in the notion of the world right now. Yeah, that kind of describes it in a very complex way, and we have very different names for it. For instance, I don't know, like hyper objects, or I don't know, like digital or complex objects. They are all something ungraspable, and they create like the structures that are so much bigger and so much um, and have like a lot of chaos in them, a lot of unpredictability, and we're trying to we as a human species are trying to find ways to research them and to kind of
Make sense of it all.
yeah, make sense of it all. And while we are doing that, I think there are a lot of problems arising. Because, for instance, I know the extensive use of big data would be one possible answer to deal with something so complex as, I know, ecological systems entangled together with political systems and entangled together with technical infrastructures. And when we are trying to uh, kind of get all this data together and have an algorithm um, try to decide on that and try to make sense of that. There is, of course, this point where we do not know what is happening inside of this black box and what the algorithm does actually. And while we are not seeing that, of course, there are a lot of biases arising and a lot of blank spaces left that uh, of course, are most important to kind of look into. Um, no, I'm thinking, for instance, of one of our grants projects, which is an upcoming project by Anna Engelhardt, who is a Russian artist, and what she does and what she does in her practice as well is she tries to describe and reproduce different machinic algorithms that deal with politics and deal with some very material systems of information. Um,
Wow,
so,
she's
um,
26, quite a bright, bright thing.
right, yeah, yeah. Um, I don't know, I would probably even show some of her projects, or I don't know. Just a sec. Mm,
She's trained in Goldsmith.
yeah.
I would never find it on my own.
Yeah, so that is, for instance, one of the projects they did in collaboration with other researchers, and there they were looking there uh, um, at the logistics and colonial logistics that rise in post-Soviet space, and those are several researchers that look into this very entangled infrastructural points. For instance, I'm not sure if this video would be quite graspable. Um, but yeah, they're talking about political infrastructures and some very mechanical infrastructures that are not shown or not accessible even by human beings, but affect the lives of a lot of people on post-Soviet space. That is, for instance, connected with situations in Ukraine and in Crimea, and like the ways that um, political technologies are kind of masked into some very different economical or like other infrastructural fields. So that is like a very extensive research actually, and I would just recommend to check out some of the projects they have there. They're pretty different and yeah,
Intermodal terminal.
yeah.
Nikita, I don't know, is you are more in the curating side, and I don't know if this like touched your experience there, but how does this relate to the market? How do you see that? Do you see these artists like selling videos or charging for the experience or being endlessly funded by grants and how do you like moving forward? Because I think we are in a turning point for how the market organizes as well, isn't it? These art fairs will not be the same. The art collecting won't be the same. Maybe the collecting of concrete material art will be questioned because it has a tax on the resources. So how do you see these artists like interacting with the market system?
Well, I'm not sure about like some concrete prognosis as usual, and well, I think there are very different modes of that possible, like from blockchain art to not having it indeed as a market at all. But what I think of it and what I think is interesting is what Hita Steyrl was writing on it. And she was talking about, you know, this invisible art and invisible logistics of art, which has been formed in the art system for like the recent several decades. And the idea is that a lot of art stays in duty-free zones. Her article is called Duty-Free Art.
Yeah, it's
And so
one of the books behind here.
right, yeah. So they're always unseen and they are kind of nowhere, and this is entangled with this kind of liquidity, yeah, the liquidity of an art as an asset, and it is really interesting how this kind of form or this kind of image of liquidity actually arised in post-internet art. You know, you can always find, like even here, you can just see this liquid objects everywhere.
Because
And in this
value is
way,
always happening in the digital world, isn't it? Like the concrete world, you
yeah,
put it aside, you don't see it anymore. In the digital world, but value is always active.
right, yeah, it is always at your grasp, and it is also reproducible, and it is super distributed. So yeah, I really like the way that art kind of answers these questions and these insecurities of the market, and kind of always trying to leave it, but still finding its place somewhere. So I'm pretty sure that these kinds of projects could be at some point kind of inscribed in the market as well.
Yeah, yeah,
As
like
yeah,
Iris,
actually,
our colleague from China yesterday, was saying
yeah.
of the experiment with blockchain, so that you could trace and limit use and encourage like exchange, so that you don't have endless production. And do you have any of these artists that like work with like technology and performance, like where you can see like changing perception of space or behavior or gesture and in response to technology and
Yeah, well, I think I can tell you a little about an upcoming project that I'm not sure I could even show in something right now, but we are working with Lu Yan. She's a Chinese artist and a great one. Um, she's working with this kind of super hyper intensive visionary modes that are produced from anime to all this otaku culture, and together with that, she researches our neural systems and the ways they can be reproduced and kind of born into the digital world or from the digital world. Um, yeah, she was doing, for instance, video games as well. And what is her current project? It is like sorry, it is a project on creating her human double. She has like a very precise um, digital model of herself, which is present in digital space, obviously, and she's planning to do performances with that, performances with dance artists and actors who kind of have this, I don't know, tracking suits and which are very precise as well, and they kind of simulate dance culture from different parts of the world, or I know some different types of performative actions and performative situations. And I think we'll be doing that with her during this year, probably having some artists and actors from Russia to kind of present her digital self in a live stream, and probably also working with some digital electronic musicians from Moscow as well to kind of parallel these different universes.
Well, it's interesting about culture because it goes over the political limitations, isn't it? Maybe it would be quite impossible to imagine like Russia and China and maybe America collaborating on something outside of culture.
Well, yeah, that's true. And it's interesting that, yeah, indeed, this modes of collaboration are kind of a place where you get some freedom. And yeah, I think it's culture, and it's also you know, like academic research or para-academic research, where you actually have a lot more freedom and a lot of more ways to kind of talk about the things that couldn't be talked in any other systems.
Yeah, back to Luang. So the performers would have their double, their virtual double, and this, so it would happen both like offline and online.
Yeah, and
Real
it
and
would be
virtual.
like, yeah, it would be in real time. So we were thinking of, yeah, having like an offline presentation of that with the possibility to see and interact with the live performer and the digital double as well.
And like if I'm in Brazil and I want to join, I would be able to perhaps see both in a screen what's happening in the real world and another screen, I don't know, what's happening in the virtual world, and maybe interact with it if I buy some gadgets and
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. Well, yeah, it is. It is all about yeah, these differences and also the possibilities of having yourself present in different ecosystems at one same time, and that's what we're, of course, doing through the newest reality we are right now in.
that's what art shows us about the new normal. We'll be
Yeah, I guess
present in
so.
different
Yeah.
ecosystems at the same time.
Yeah, and that's about this complexity theory. I mean, even right now we are present at I would say almost too much of context. I mean, we're seeing each other and we're seeing the screen, and I know I'm sitting in my country house with like some pine cones and whatever else is there, and some wind blowing. Yeah, so
So yeah,
yeah,
in quarantine in a country house.
yeah, that's what I do.
How's the situation in? You are near Moscow, I suppose. How far
Yeah,
are
I'm
you?
in Moscow. Yeah,
You in Moscow?
I'm like near Moscow. Yeah, like 20 kilometers away. But yeah, what we're having now is quarantine and self-isolation mode being cancelled, which is quite weird from what I can say. And yet, as I said at the talk, it might have some pretty straightforward political dimensions to it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess my plan is to stay put for some time. So.
Yeah, here is the same. When we had 300 people dying a day, they were saying it was absolutely imperative to stay home. Now we have like 1,300 people dying. They say we can leave, and so it doesn't really make sense.
Well, yeah, and of course, yeah, this situation is also about this complexity and this inability to reach to anything physical and to kind of assess the damage or assess the I don't know the fears and frights that are real or that are not, and that's all purely statistical and purely data driven.
Yeah.
So we kind of have to organize our bodies as data, which is
and bringing the values to all this equation, isn't it? As the artists you showed, like the algorithm that looks for truth, and because
right,
here
yeah.
there's this big debate about economy, or you save lives or you save the economy, and so if you don't really bring the values and human values and the complexity of it to the equation, then it's not a good like planning or processing. Amazing.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I mean, this is I think we're coming to the, not to be too long for both of us. This is like such a journey. It's like, it was fascinating, and I don't think I could like learn all these things unless you very generously shared your time and experience, and so that's I'm very grateful. And
Thank you so much.
yeah, it's my pleasure, and I'll be researching and going through this website and chasing all these concepts and artists. Maybe I'll reach back to you to clarify some points. And
Right, super open to that.
Yeah. So once again, thank you, and I'll send you a link to the recording when it's up. And
thanks so much. Yeah,
we'll talk sometime
soon. It's a great opportunity for a talk. Yeah.
My pleasure.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye-bye. Have a great day.
Indeed.